Welcome once again to Syntax Error, your pretentious, philosophical, pedantic podcast ostensibly about video gaming and related topics therein. Warning, this podcast contains spoilers, mature content, and language. Viewer discretion is advised. Alright, welcome back to Lost Signals, where we talk games and gaming culture, and a returning and favorite guest of ours, Ara Shirinian, has sort of agreed to do an AMA, and we've collected a bunch of questions, some submitted by you out there, some submitted by us. And we're just going to try to go through them and talk to him about game design, and sort of general aspects about that. So, Ara, once again, thanks for joining us. How's it going?
Yeah, what's up, Scott? How you doing?
Good, man.
Oh man, I can't stand this at all. Okay, that's
no problem. All right, so I think I'm just going to start launching to it. That's cool with you, unless you got anything to start off with, or promo or anything like that?
Like I could tell you about the absolutely Arctic freezing temperatures of 50 degrees in Arizona. But
yeah, Jesus. You must be freezing over there. I think we hit a high of 24 today here in Jersey or something like that.
Oh, God.
So, but in the studio...
I don't even know what I would do, because like I told you guys last time, I'm from the East Coast, but I've been living in a hot climate for so long.
Yeah.
I can't even conceive of 20, because I'm literally shaking, and I feel like I'm a baby at 50 degrees.
I envy that. It's weird though. That's all relative. You get used to it, I guess, or you just leave it behind. But that's funny.
So if we have a nuclear winter, you guys will probably have better chances to survive.
We're slightly more adapted, perhaps, when that happens, if we're still alive. But yeah, so I think I'll just start getting to it. So as you may have, audiences out there may have caught our other episodes with Ara, and he's a game designer out of Phoenix currently. Yes. Given the 50-degree temperatures you're just mentioning. So I think the most broad one I have to start off with, the question is, how did you get into game design? And how does someone go about doing that if they so wish?
Oof, that's like the broadest question of all time, right?
Yep.
Because we could start talking about it and take 2 hours just talking about that. So I want to actually can we try to narrow that down a little bit so we can just talk about one part of it for now?
I guess
it's gonna exhaust the hell out of me.
Sure, that's kind of what I thought. It was not a joke question, but yeah, it's very broad. But I'll try to rephrase it as perhaps, what was your personal journey into it? Were you interested in it at an early age? Did you get into it later? At what point did you think to yourself, "Hey, this is something I want to do. This is something that's for me, and I want to see if I can make a career of it"?
Yeah, that sounds like a manageable chunk to bite off. So, I don't know. For me, I had that, when I figure I was around 8 or something. That's when the regular Nintendo came out.
Yep.
And I just had this huge aha moment of something about my life and my future must have something to do with this. I just don't know in what shape or form. That's how big the emotional impact it had on me.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess you could say that was the initial motivator.
Okay.
And it wasn't really it wasn't anything it was I would say it's a deep emotion, because for some reason, that thing that was so amazing about watching, Super Mario Brothers for the first time and playing it, that whatever that has lit up inside me has sustained my interest even to this day. I think a lot of it just has to do with, it's just, I don't know, I just think interactive types of devices are just inherently fascinating. And for some reason or another, I just had this insatiable curiosity to, explore that territory, as opposed to the, 8 billion other territories in the world you could do with your life.
Sure, yeah, I feel you. That's awesome. So given that, then how did you just, as you got older, I guess the question I have underneath that, maybe you can fold into, is what kind of experience, education skills that were required, or that did you find yourself learning or going into studying, if you will, to achieve what you just said? Yeah,
well, that's a really deep and subtle question, because there's a few different sets of groups associated with that are actually pretty different from each other than it may seem. And I'll tell you what I mean. Like, there's the sense of like, okay, well, I should like get the certifications and the pieces of paper that will give me the best chances of getting a video game job.
Right.
Right? Like, that's one set. But that's like pretty mutually exclusive to the set of skills that I would say would make you an extremely good designer or a great designer.
So it's more like, God, yep.
So it's tough because, right? The criteria by which you'd be judged by, it also depends on who's doing the judging.
Yeah.
So, for example, like, this is an extreme oversimplification, but, you know, EA as a company, might be more likely to hire you if you had a certification or a degree in the niche they're looking for than a small employer who's like, I don't give a fuck what piece of paper you have. You need to prove to me what you can do.
Yeah.
You know, which is like your portfolio, which is like, you know, the output of, ideally, you know, your best capabilities and your greatest interest and passion about like whatever subset there is about video game development that's really exciting.
Sure. So like,
sorry. So that's a really complicated question, but go ahead. Yeah.
I get it. Like, yeah, you're right. Like, it seems simple on the surface, but for sure, like, I kind of want to like talk to you about the subtleties of it. You know, what the differences are. So basically, it seems the answer is it depends who you like, what kind of sector you want to work for, which kind of segues into my next one. It's sort of the AAA industry versus the indie/smaller studios. So I believe, would you mind telling our listeners that who you're working for now? Are you working for your own company? Are you sort of like a freelancer, or what's your status now as a designer?
Yeah, so right now I've been contracting lately, which means that I haven't had a employee job for a bunch of years now. So I find contracts, and I'm like a one-person company, which just is a more fancy way of saying that I just freelance. Yeah,
that's awesome.
So I have, so there's one contract I have right now. It's about something I can't really talk about.
NDAs and so forth. I think we discussed that last time. Sure.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be comfortable discussing it either without their specific
Fair enough.
Anyway,
sure.
So. But basically, like what my contracting job constitutes, or my freelance job constitutes, is it's effectively like like my agreement with them is I do 30 hours a week with them.
Okay.
So a few months ago I had another contract. I was doing two contracts simultaneously. The other one ended. So I find myself, this is a kind of a way of working that I prefer more because it's just a little more chaotic, and no, actually it's not any more chaotic because it's just, there's no job security in the industry anyway. But at least if I don't have to suffer the risk of, a layoff or the company exploding, which has happened to me so many times that, I basically just resigned myself to accepting that, that's a risk no matter what. And so I better, be responsible for finding my own work on a per job basis. And I'd rather do that knowing, basically being aware of the trade I'm making and what I'm going into, rather than entering a company as an employee and, having this false veil of security, which, in my experience hasn't proven to be true.
Isn't really there. Sure. So, sort of relate to that then, I would guess the answer is yes, but given that that circumstance for you, is that more freedom, like creatively? You know what I mean? Like if you're just sort of coming in there as your own sort of entity rather than being an employee under the banner of a larger corporation, Well,
I'll tell you something about that.
Okay.
It feels a lot freer, but I think that's more psychological than anything else.
Okay.
And it doesn't mean that I'm freer more creatively. It actually, in a lot of ways, means that what I do for the company is bound more tightly.
Really?
Well, yeah, because it's like, okay, look, I'm a contractor. I'm coming to their company to help them solve problems. You know, what problems do you need help with that I can help you solve? Okay, it's this set of problems.
Okay.
Those are the ones I can work on, you know. There's less of an expectation, or even an impression, right, that the contractor is responsible for, or I wouldn't even go that heavy. I would say something a lot lighter, like it's even within the contractor's purview to like solve problems in other areas of the company, even like marginally outside of your stuff. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm splitting too fine of.
No, I get you. So, like, I find that really interesting, like, fascinating, because I see what you're saying. So, on the surface, right, you'd be like, oh, I'm working, like, sort of more for myself, as you said, in a sense, but at the same time, like, listen, we need you to, like, I'm here to do X, Y, and Z. So, you might have thoughts about, let's say, C or A or whatever, right? But you're like, that's not really your purview, as you said. So, it's not as if you're doing all of that. You're like, I'm here to work on this section or this part of the game design, right?
Yeah, let me give you an example of like the level of this that I'm talking about, because this could very easily be misconstrued for like, you know, I love it. I hate like, you know, solving other people's problems and I just want a narrowly defined job, which is not, it's not that.
Sure.
So what it is basically that, you know, as an employee, right, you have some level of investment into the company long term.
Yep.
And you operate in accordance with that generally, you know, or at least like that effect is there. In other words, right, like, I mean, I want to have a long relationship with all my clients, but just the nature of just the statistics of how the dice rolls is that, companies don't need my skills for long periods of time anyway. So, and they don't like, I don't know. I feel like we're like actually getting into the territory of splitting too fine a hair. So
fair enough.
Where can we steer this that's like interesting to talk about? Because I feel like I'm getting really like overloadedly technical.
Okay. No,
that's
something that's actually not that important.
If you don't mind me, breaking in real quick,
yeah.
By the way, Steve, I'm also here.
What's up, Steve?
Just maybe a quick question that maybe somewhat more interesting for you to talk about. If you have anything like this going on, are you working on anything independent at the moment, like for your own, just like under your own banner, as your own type of game, or anything like that?
Like
side projects that you're just sticking around with, I guess.
I used to have side projects. I don't have side projects anymore.
Okay.
Gotcha. Is there any reason for that, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of honest reasons that are, I don't want to do more than one project at a time.
That's fair.
That's, and I'm not being extremely strict about that, but there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it is that it's harder for me to focus on something and I feel like make a lot of meaningful progress in it if I'm splitting my attention multiple ways.
Yeah, that's perfectly reasonable to me. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Just curious about it though. Sure.
Yeah, but at the same time too, yes, in the back of my head, I also have these thoughts like, man, you should be like working on like your own thing in, your own like personal project, because that's what like people who are, good in this industry do. Yeah, I mean, I have a little bit of remorse about that because I feel like there's some kind of expectation that I somehow should. But I mean, it doesn't really go that far. It's funny that we're talking about this now because I was just thinking earlier today, I was thinking about like if you guys would ask me about like what I was playing.
That's what it's on the list for sure. I was like drilling down to it.
Okay, well we better just talk about it now.
Yeah, hit me with what you're playing.
strangely appropriate. It's funny because I normally only play one game at a time.
I feel you. I'm exactly the same way. So I'm with you on that mindset. So go on.
And right now I'm playing 2 games, and I'm feeling a certain level of anxiety about that, just because. And this is just like something really idiosyncratic about myself. So one of them is Gran Turismo Sport.
Okay, nice, yeah.
I feel like when I play that game, I'm practicing a skill long term. I really am. So I'm also playing this other game called Bloodborne, and when I'm playing that, even though that is a deep and fascinating game in its own right, I'm like, look, if this game didn't exist, I'd be spending this time practicing my skill in that other game.
Sure.
And long term for me, that's a lot more important, because I know that when I'm done Bloodborne, I'll have some good memories, but then I'll also have a great, and by that I only mean in magnitude, memory that I spent like 200 hours of my life that I could have better spent doing something else.
What you'll also have at the end of Bloodborne or any Dark Souls game other than that is the exact map of that entire game burned into your mind forever.
Yeah, and you know what? That's I don't think that's a bad thing. I think
it's impressive.
A good thing.
Yeah, it's impressive level design, if nothing else, I think.
Yeah, man, they're really clever about how they make their spaces. That's definitely true.
No, it's funny. I was going to say, no, you're trained to fight Lovecraftian monsters, man. You're definitely practicing a skill with Bloodborne, like, obviously. But no, like, so you mentioned Gran Turismo. You're a big you actually drive cars and so forth, like. Recreationally, right? Correct? And
yeah, as much as I can afford to, which is not very much, but I mean, yeah, it sucks because when you love cars and racing and you figure out very quickly that, racing is like literally the most expensive hobby on the planet. Like I'll challenge anybody to mention a hobby that's more expensive than that.
No, sure. I mean, I absolutely believe it. And it's funny, like, that's also a question I had, like, what other hobbies that you enjoy that may or may not assist or feed into your game design, sensibilities? And I think that's one of them. So for anyone who doesn't know, that's something you enjoy. And that's why you're saying it. You feel as if when you're when you're doing 2 games at once, one of which, though, is more in line with a skill that you can actually use or at least employ in day-to-day life, you might get...
Yeah, you know what? There's very little mapping that happens in learned video game skills, but out of everything that I've experienced, if your logistical setup is right, it can actually, like, you playing a simulation video game like a racing simulation, if you get the interface part right, it can map a lot, like, just very surprisingly well.
Pretty accurately? Yeah. That's awesome.
Like the skills that you pick up translate in a very surprising way. That's one of the things that keeps me going in that as a hobby, because it's just like, it's very unusual. But if you really think about it, I guess it's not, because that's one of the things I like, why I like racing so much. It's a very pure interface type of experience. You have very limited range of inputs. Your input is you're seeing, the input to you, and you're responding by either steering or, going faster or slower, more or less.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, like, sort of on...
it's a very, like, elegant kind of thing to me.
It's very, streamlined, I guess is the word I was going to say there.
Yeah, right on.
So I kind of want to maybe go back a bit. So you said you were doing sort of contract work for a couple years. Before that, if I recall correctly, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, you were designing, when you were designing like your own games, did you have a company, like an indie studio for yourself?
I never had a studio that was my own studio. I participated in a few startups here and there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I was never one of the principals though. And let's see, I think most of them, if not all of them, have pretty much eaten themselves up, so.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, the games business is rough. It's just rough.
Yeah, fair enough. So within that, sort of tying to what we said together, you said would you say Mario Brothers was the game that got you into it, or was like another game like beyond that? Like, that's the thing, like sort of like, let's say, gravitated towards games as a whole, and that you wanted to be part of that sector. Was there a game after, like, maybe you're a little older, maybe you're like teenager, that really like solidified the fact that like this is the thing I want to do, and this is like the, if not genre, although you can discuss that for sure. Like, this is the, I don't know how to describe it. This is the one I want to do. I want to make games in this style, I guess I'll say. If that makes sense to you.
Yeah. You know what? I really got to say, like, nothing had the impact that Super Mario Brothers had.
Fair enough.
I think that one thing that people miss out on experientially, and this is an incredibly nerdy thing to explain, but I'm going to explain it anyway.
Well, nerds here. Explain it, please.
There's like... you know, one of the things that makes something like a Super Mario Brothers beautiful, and I mean like literally the first one, when you compare to like, I don't know, pick any high production game, like the last Uncharted game. That's a pretty good comparison, I think. Is that when you experience something like Super Mario Brothers, you're experiencing an abstraction of a world on a level where it's very nakedly abstract, right? And so because it's very nakedly abstract, you can apprehend it on the level of relationships a lot more easily than something like the last greatest Uncharted game. Because when you see a scene in Super Mario Brothers and you've learned the grammar, and it doesn't take a very long time to learn that grammar, it's like every single, you know, everything is in units of blocks on the screen of the same size, and every single block is a symbol that it just like, I don't know, at least for me, like the emotional landscape is it like, it screams out at you about its properties and what it does and what it can do and can't do and what it's good with and bad against, and all of these really interesting relationships that when you look at the screen, right, it's not just the screen, it's like, it's just screaming at you with symbols and meaning, and that's a really deep thing for me. But when you look at like any arbitrary screen in Uncharted, for example, right? I mean, you get a very different picture. It's, you know, very realistic looking. And yes, you know, there are use of symbols because in real life, you know, the world is full of meaningful symbols too. But it doesn't do it in such a stylistic way anymore. So it doesn't really have that same level of like abstracted beauty. Of
like sort of raw, instinctual, like maybe visceral connection, I guess you're saying. And I really like, I like your description.
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah, I think we talked about it. Like you described it as such, I think, in our last episode. But the grammar of games, I think, is something like super interesting. Perhaps we can do one just about that. But I do see what you're saying.
Yeah, that's an endless topic. That's a great topic.
Yeah, I fucking love it.
I just wanted to. I'm sorry to butt in here, but like, what do you think of a game like Braid? In terms of what you were just talking about, I don't know if you played Braid or not.
I did like Braid, yeah.
Would you say it has like a similar level of that like abstract symbolism that Super Mario Brothers had? Because that's kind of why I like that game. It was reminiscent.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially considering like the whole like definition of Super Mario Brothers could probably be subsumed into Braid.
Exactly. Well, that's kind of exactly what it is. Like it was such a like.
I was waiting for that.
It was such a love letter to like those old platformers, but did something completely different with them, and kind of added a whole different level of abstraction to it. Like just as you were talking about that, that's kind of where my mind went. And
yeah, I think maybe that's just the appeal of like pixel style games in general, yeah?
Well, perhaps that can be its own episode, which we somewhat covered. So like, I'll tie it in real quickly. The nostalgia kind of factor, right? Braid was, I would say, one of the earliest ones to employ like a retro style of graphics, right? To sort of get you back to the feeling of playing the first Mario Brothers, of playing that old school Nintendo stuff. So, and then I think, you tell me if you agree with this, I think that trend has continued even today. So one of the questions we had was, what do you think about the so-called quote unquote retro revival of like games like that and games that have come since, like Axiom Verge is ones that come to mind.
As you could probably guess now, I mean, I think it's great. I think that, see, there's like an inefficiency in the transmission of meaning when you're looking at a game like Uncharted.
I would tend to agree.
You have to do two kinds of like cognitive perception. Like you first have to look and you'd be like, okay, I'm in a forest. That's a tree, right? But then you have to do this translation because you know that it's not a real forest and it's not a real tree. It's a video game forest and it's a video game tree. So you have to translate that into, okay, now what do these symbols actually mean in terms of what the game's grammar is?
Yeah.
You know, and what that means is like, okay, this tree is actually like part of this wall and I can't go beyond it because the tree's next to this path and I can't like just run into the forest because that's not part of this story, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they have to have boundaries on where you can go and can't go, even in Uncharted. But I think that's bad. There's a lot of badness there because since you have to do two of these calculations in your head, you have to do the perception and then the translation.
It sort of loses something.
That takes a longer time to like just to think about before you get to the conclusion of it.
To process it, yeah. Yeah, I get you.
Yeah, and so games that are... Now, this isn't to say that if you do a retro-style game, that you automatically get this shit.
Right.
Because you don't. Right?
That's what I'm trying to get at, right?
Yeah, really? Because you can make a key look like, like the poo emoji or something, and that's a very bad use of symbols.
Yeah. That'd be funny, but not effective, I would say.
Yeah. So you don't get it for free, but what it allows you to do, and I think that this is something that you could say about stylism over realism as a general concept.
Okay.
So you could think about that in many different ways. But basically, when your style is stylism, if that makes any sense, then what you're doing is that you're communicating visually in a minimalistic way in order to communicate what's important the most efficiently.
Okay, I get that. That makes perfect sense, yeah.
Yeah, and when you're in the approach of realism, what you're doing is kind of the opposite.
Yep.
You are basically, you're emphasizing, you're prioritizing the primacy of realistic rendering over communicating symbolism or communicating meaning. And if you think about it that way, I mean, that makes it sound really bad.
It's certainly not, it's more of a backhanded insult or compliment, at least at the very most. But I get what you're saying, and like, that's super interesting to me. Again, I want to make all these topics. Every single time we talk to you, you bring up a couple of things that I think to myself, that could be its own fucking show, like unto itself, which perhaps we should do.
There's too much stuff to talk about.
No, I fucking love it. But it's basically so if I sort of like, I'll get us back on track or get myself back on track. It's like the realism versus, like you said, the abstract or stylism kind of thing. And when you have that divide, it's as if you have to both approach it design-wise and also as a player-wise in a different kind of mindset because of the effect you're going for, if that makes any sense as well.
Yeah,
because of the grammar you're laying out for the player, and that you are laying out, like you are like basically creating the alphabet, if you will, of a given game.
Yeah, well, if you think about, like, what's funny to me is that the way we just framed realism, it's basically saying, like, we don't actually care that much how you interpret this in terms of functionality or affordances, which is, like, what you do. It's very strange to me. Like, it doesn't make sense. I don't know how most people it doesn't seem to be an issue for most people, but for me, it's very hard to reconcile the two.
Something off about it, or just
compute for me.
Doesn't feel right. Yeah. So maybe that's sort of like what we can sort of circle back to and say, like, when a retro nostalgia style game is done right, like using a grammar that makes sense, that is understandable, but it also evokes that sort of sensation or feeling you were saying earlier, where that, like, it's not trying to match reality, but it's teaching you, it's giving you a world that is surreal in a sense, but that you can relate to in a different way and connect to on a sort of maybe different kind of level. And that's sort of like what people are like gravitate towards, what at least perhaps a certain section of gamers will enjoy.
Well, you know what? This is a pretty bold claim, but I think that fundamentally it's a more honest mode of expression.
I like that. I would tend to agree.
Let me be precise about the context, right?
Sure.
It's not like it's more honest or less honest to the artist that's making it. Not saying that that person is more or less honest,
right,
or that their work is more or less honest. It's more honest to the effective relationships between the various things in the game. It's more honest to the grammar of the game.
Yeah, I get that. I get what you're saying for sure. Yep.
It's like it's more honest in the same way that, painting a picture of a door on a piece of wood is not honest.
Yeah. That's a really good analogy. I like it. Yeah. Makes perfect sense. So I got another one. This is sort of like, I'll diverge a bit, but this is the one we got. Can you tell us a funny story or a story about a weird or funny bug or glitch that you experienced while designing a game or while making a game that was amusing or stood out for you at any point?
Yeah, there's been a lot. Weird or funny.
Or maybe one of the most memorable ones that they're like, that was a good one. Like, that's a glitch we got to stomp out, but it's amusing that's there in the game,
Yeah, let me see if. See, the thing is that it's hard that any of them even stand out at all. Because they're not that funny.
I guess when you're designing them, it's more just a problem. Like, get it.
Yeah, like they're not that amusing normally. I mean, like I could tell you like something like, we did this and that, and this person's model, did this crazy thing, and flew in a way that looked like he had his hand in his butt or something like that.
Sure.
But that stuff becomes old hat so fast
that you see so much of it. Yeah.
Yeah, you see so much of that sort of thing, so that like none of those are like fun to really talk about.
All right,
man,
that's fine.
I'll let you know if it pops into my head as we keep going. I don't have a great story on hand about that right now.
All right, fair enough. I just thought it'd be like a funny thing to throw out there.
Yeah.
So I'll move on to another question. This is sort of like a general industry question, I guess, but one of our audience's members wanted to know about, what do you think of like early access games? Like putting out, I don't want to say an incomplete game, right? It's called early access, so it's an alpha essentially, right? Or maybe a beta at best. And then that seems to be more of a recentish trend. But do you have any thoughts on that? Like, what do you think that's a good idea? You think it's like good for the industry, for the consumer, for the designers, for the developers, or just what's your general impression about early access style, like early release games, and then we'll have a full version coming later, but you can pay and play for a smaller chunk of it now if you want to.
Yeah, I think it's really weird. It's hard for me to I mean, I think on one level I understand why something like this exists. And I think that it's not necessarily great that it exists, because in my mind, I don't know, I had this expectation that, if you're making a product, you work on your product, and then you finish it.
Right, and you release it.
And you don't release it until it's done, and so then everybody gets the same experience. Now, having said that, right, the obvious question is, well, the thing that's really particular about a video game, especially if you've got, like network components and stuff like that, is you have to really test the thing.
Right.
And the more people you can test it with, the better it is, the more information you can gather, and the more efficiently you can basically get your product to a really polished state. So it's just kind of like this half-seas kind of thing there, right?
Yeah. It's almost like you're crowdsourcing QA, but they're kind of like paying for it.
Well, it is. It is effectively like crowdsourcing QA,
right.
But it's like, is that bad? Well, everybody knows what they're getting into, right?
Yeah, sure.
It's not like anyone's like, oh, I'm so surprised this didn't work as I expected.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, there's like a level of necessity to it because these things are so freaking complicated. These games are so freaking complicated. They're universes inside themselves. I mean, every day I'm endlessly shocked at the number of people out there just slaving away and working on their own projects. And maybe it's because I'm not working on mine. but it's like there's so much endless effort, so much minute detail and consideration and work that needs to be put in to any game of depth. And there's so many games now that most people can't sell any.
Yeah.
It's so many that it's just a logistics problem. There's no way I think that most people could effectively test their games if there wasn't something like early access.
Like that, yeah.
Now, on the other hand, like this is yet an even more subtle issue because from what I've learned about early access, it's like it does not defeat or eliminate the reality that you only have one chance to make a first impression.
Mm-hmm.
And the prevailing knowledge, and if anyone wants to correct us, they can, but I'm pretty sure this is right, about how early access has been doing for most people who developers who do early access, is that, look, if you don't do early access, right, then your launch is your launch, right?
Yep.
But if you do your early access, for the vast majority of developers, effectively that launch becomes your launch.
Yeah, exactly.
So your real launch after the early access launch, it will cannot ever have the same impact. You're affecting that, by having the early access launch.
Yeah.
So the prevailing thought about it now that's been going around developers, as far as I know, is that, yeah, you know what, you can use early access to gain some really useful information and to, hone in on your goals a lot more efficiently, but it doesn't eliminate the fact that you're still doing a first impression launch. And so what that means is that basically, I think what it means, and I'm just trying, like, synthesizing, speculating this on the fly here.
Sure.
But I think what it would mean is that basically, whatever you're testing out with early access, you got to test out like one pretty narrow thing. If your game is a total mess, then your launch afterward, it'll not save it.
Won't matter anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
right.
Would you say like your early access launch might as well be like, if you have very big problems with your games, you should probably not do an early access launch, right? Like you should probably wait until you solve those problems and then do your quote unquote early access launch. And then
it's like a crutch, right? But a crutch can take one limb. It can't take the whole damn body.
Yeah, that's awesome. Dude, I always love your analogies. It's the best.
I don't know why I'm only coming up with good analogies on this show.
Well, keep coming on because I want to keep hearing.
It's never happened in my life before or after. I don't know what's going on with this show.
That's awesome. I love it, though. But yeah, they were curious about like what the, I guess, as you just laid out for us, sort of the prevailing mindset was in the industry or like, you know, in a certain sector about doing early access games and how it affects, like you said, your release and your image to the public, even if it's to your section of gamers who engage in early access, and then I don't know how to call it, like your true launch, I guess. Your after early access launch, your actual launch, right? Yeah. And what the difference is there. That's awesome. All right, so I got another one. I'm going to somewhat change gears, but this is a more technical-minded one that
yeah, sure. Let's try it.
Someone like to know. They want to ask you, what engines or programs or coding language do you most often use, or what are the ones? I feel as if this is more like they're asking you what they should learn to go into design, or what are the most common languages and so forth programs used.
Maybe, but I think it's pretty natural to be curious about what developers use.
I of course am too.
Yeah, I mean, like that was like one of my first questions as a kid when I emailed this developer out of the blue. Like right before, man, it was a long time ago, but I had email back then. Anyway.
So it wasn't that long ago.
Wasn't that long? I'm not that old. Come on. Okay. So what are we talking about?
What are the common, like, at least maybe when you started and now, like, what languages or software, like engines and so forth that are like most commonly used or that are just the most prevalent?
This isn't that long, so I can run through it pretty quick.
Okay.
I'm thinking that you might appreciate a more comprehensive answer. You know, my first computer was a Texas Instruments TI 994A.
Jesus Christ. Yeah. It's awesome though.
I learned a little bit of BASIC with that, but I didn't really grasp it very well.
Okay.
In third grade, we had a TRS 80 in our classroom, and I learned a very little amount of BASIC on that too. It was a little bit more capable than my computer. What was my second computer? I think my second computer was actually a Macintosh.
Nice.
Anyway, I mean, I had Macs for, most of high school and college.
Okay.
And in college, I didn't really do anything related to programming until I took computer science as my major. So, in computer science, we learned Pascal, then we learned C++,
yep.
Then we dabbled in a whole bunch of other languages a little bit, many of which were, some were cool, some were excruciating, like Lisp. Then, when I started actually working as a game designer, the kind of applications that I used were like it's most of my experience, and I would say most of my preference is working in what you might call designer tools.
Okay.
So it's not scripting, it's not writing code, but what it is, just using an editor interface designed by an engineer, or some other people, to build the game with. Right? So, Unity's really big now.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting.
Like in most of the projects that I've been on lately, it's been Unity.
Okay.
But at the same time, having worked for a lot of corporations, I've had a lot of experience in proprietary tools.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of like, I like to say that it's kind of like my specialty. Like when I go interview for employers, there's something peculiar about proprietary tools. It's not like Photoshop.
Right.
Because you got to understand
each has their own like set of rules and so forth. Yeah.
So it's like it's not as luxurious as Photoshop. It's not as nice as like Maya, or all of the top-notch tools, all the top professional tools. Those are like, you're like, I don't know. God, now I'm too self-conscious about analogies, but those are very luxurious.
Yeah, this on the phone naturally, but I totally get what you mean, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of like...
Yeah, but the problem with proprietary tools is that they were just made... They can't spend the money and the time to make it nice. So they were just made to the point of good enough to do the job, and that's it. And so the peculiarities of them are that they're really obtuse, they're hard to learn, documentation's bad, they break all the time. They're just a pain in the ass to work with.
Yeah.
But if you're accustomed to that, then it's no big deal. So I have a lot of experience working in that sort of.
So it's sort of like your niche, your sort of forte. Like, listen, I've worked a lot of proprietary, engine and so forth. So that's cool.
Yeah, the way I present myself is, I'm not the prima donna who's complaining about how there's not 50 undos,
right?
or even that I lost 4 hours of work today because something happened that I could have never predicted,
right?
Stuff like that can happen sometimes. There's so much of that shit that goes on in projects that I'm going to ramble here for just a second.
No problem.
But,
yeah.
There's so much of that you have to have the grit of just not being dissuaded by it. It just comes with the territory.
Yeah, sure.
You're going to have to do stuff over again. You're going to lose work. You're going to break things. You're going to break things in a destructive way that makes you feel very remorseful about and very unhappy to do it all over again. But, and it's not that endemic, the redo your work thing. That's probably the most, soul crushing thing about anything, I think. If you have to do the same exact steps over again, the exact same way.
Yep.
Except you knew that before you did it just right. And this time will never match that time.
Yeah, you got a little hiccup here and there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the worst. But yeah, you got to deal with that shit all the time.
That's awesome. Well, not awesome, but interesting as hell for sure. So I guess I kind of want to do a follow up. This isn't on a list, but since you just told us about that, so that sort of means, you tell me, it means you're learning basically a new engine in a sense, a new, like you said, proprietary tool, but each of which is possibly radically different from the last one you worked on. So you sort of to retrain yourself every time you take on another contract or project, right? You're okay, you come to they'll say, this is what we're using. You're all right, I got to take a look. But, how does
you do? In a way, it's like learning a new language. Or a lot of different programs have a lot of different paradigms.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's really hard to put your mind in the frame of that paradigm.
Sure.
And I don't know how to prove, to people that I'm better or someone's better or worse at that than other people. But all I can do is I can say that I've had a lot of experience.
Yeah, I do it a lot, and I think I'm pretty good at it. Pretty much, it seems. That's awesome.
That's how I try to present myself to prospective clients.
All right, so that's a lot of the questions we had, and I think we're at almost an hour, which is roughly how we go. So I'm gonna try to go a couple more. And Stevo, you got anything?
Yeah. I'm not even running out of steam. So
no, man. Listen, Ara, you're the best. We'd love to have you on again. I think we might, in fact, make a regular-ish segment, a recurring guest spot for you for sure. Because, like I said,
yeah, I think that'd be cool.
Every time, I'm just so super interested in your ideas and the stuff you tell us and come up with. Like I said, I can make an episode of it, a number of things. I think we should do that. So
let's see if we can get
we'll see more of
listeners or your watchers, your viewers to get some more controversial questions.
Yeah, well, I think that's a couple of people. So if you remember, last time I was on with Ian, our other partner, and he actually teaches. He runs a computer lab at his out of college that he works at. So he has a couple of younger students, and a lot of them are CS majors and so forth. And I think they were somewhat intimidated, or oh, you're talking to a game designer, but they didn't want to give you any hardball questions, I suppose, right? They, like I said, a bunch of them, I assume, as I gather, want just to know, hey, this guy's a game designer. How do I get to do that job? So
I think we should. Yeah, no, hardballs are fun.
Yeah, so I will definitely come up with some for next time, Steve-O.
I will just ask this, I guess. Coming towards the end of this, interview talk that we got going on. Are there are you interested in talking about any of the games that you've done? Are you interested in going over some of them, what they're about, kind of what your genres are, or what you get into and what you like doing, that type of thing?
Maybe. I mean, I guess it depends on what specifically we'd get into, right?
Well, I guess let me get a little bit more specific.
Try to parse it down.
Yeah.
Good.
You've had a decent career. I went and looked over your website
He's
last
researching
week at
you.
some point. You know, like I looked over it, and you have a bunch of games there. Are there any that you're like really proud of, or like that you're like to talk about more than others, I guess?
Yeah, a few, I guess. I'm having a weird response to your question because
I apologize.
no.
He's got the hard balls.
You have to be sorry about. There's just like, I feel like I talked about all that stuff a zillion times already, and it's just a little fatiguing.
Sure,
So
fair
it's not
enough.
my favorite thing to talk about, but if we can find like an angle or that's like if you guys direct it, in other words, if you guys lead me with questions about it, then I don't mind talking about it at all.
All right. So, what was your favorite part of your favorite game that you've worked on?
Oh, that I've worked on. Okay. Man, you know what? I mean, it's so that's a tough one, but I would say that like one of the most satisfying things was that Red Star game that I worked on, which was the first project that I worked on. There was the thing that was so cool about working on that project was because they had a tool where, like, I don't even know if you guys have even played that game.
I have not.
Or even
Sorry.
watched. Yeah, we might want to like.
I've seen a little bit of it. I did watch like
there's videos.
Yeah.
There's videos online of gameplay, so you can check out the videos online and see what it's like.
We can definitely link some videos. Yeah.
Yeah. But that for me was just like a very personally satisfying experience as a developer, not just because it was the first professional video game project I ever did, but because we were so lucky to have the tool that we had, because the tool that we had was actually the product of 4 years of development on a previous project called Vex.
Nice. Wow.
And so when I started at that company, basically I get to use a tool that had been developed for 4 whole years. And it was just really amazing because I never thought that I had, that I could make the situations and I could give people the experiences that I was able to with that tool. Like that was a really amazing thing because if you were, because that tool enabled a kind of creation of art in a really unique way, because if you had to do that from scratch, it would just be like, I'm not going to say it's impossible. It's obviously not impossible.
It would take you 4 years.
It would just be 10 times as hard. Yeah.
Well, just like the technical hurdles, right? Like you'd have to overcome so many technical hurdles before you even got to the point of like the level of, music composition as an analogy. If that makes any sense at all, right?
Sure.
Like, it's like basically like the tool will let me write the music in terms of the music and just enjoy the act of writing music. Whereas if we didn't have this,
You have to invent the instruments, I guess.
it'd be like no musical instruments existed. You would have to craft the musical instrument first.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that even sounds too easy as I'm describing. But anyway, it was just, I don't know. It was just like, I never thought that, like, I'd never experienced a working context where I had a tool that powerful.
That's cool.
And it was amazing for me to like think through as a design process. Like, I'm thinking like, okay, how am I going to construct this scenario, like a boss encounter, for example, right?
Yep.
And I'm going to say, yeah, like I'm going to make this thing, and this thing is going to like chase you over here, right? And then that thing is going to make you do this other thing. And there's a lot of intentionality embedded in these boss encounters that I designed. And the most satisfying thing in the world was that basically, right, like I'm setting up this thing to talk to the player with, right?
Yep.
And when the player is able to negotiate what I'm setting up for them, right, it's like an obstacle course I'm setting up with them, but it's not a static obstacle course. It's like a conversation with them.
Yeah, yeah.
So when I'm setting up something and I'm watching the player negotiate it successfully and maybe picking up on the hints that I dropped in various ways, that's like, I don't think there's anything I've ever experienced in life that was more satisfying.
More gratifying. Yeah, it sounds amazing.
Yeah, that was amazing. And that was mainly like, that was just such a fortunate intersection of so many different things at once. Because if I wasn't at that company, if the tools weren't there, if they didn't have that previous project, if I didn't like just be lucky enough to be there at that time at that place, because also like in my professional experience, I have not yet had as gratifying a creative experience since
then. That, yeah.
And that was your first, that you said that was your first professional experience with?
Yeah, professionally, yeah. So
that's incredible.
For example, yeah, like I built like a Unreal level,
yeah,
as my portfolio. But that was, yeah, I mean, just the tool was just that powerful. It was just
and
it
that
was
awesome.
And,
Yeah.
it sucks because that thing's gone.
That's
doesn't exist anymore.
It's been gone for over a decade.
Yeah.
Like it's just been forgotten about because the company went bankrupt and no one will ever use it, or I don't know, maybe somewhere it's hidden on somebody's hard drive.
I was gonna say, you gotta find it, get the IP or whatever from it, and start using it again, bring it back.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to get technical, whoever bought up all of the assets of that company probably owns it technically.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of one of the sad things about companies. A lot of companies develop a lot of really sophisticated software sometimes, and most people never see it.
And it goes by the wayside, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure that happens a lot where people have great stuff and then it just goes away. But thank you for answering that question.
Yeah, there you
sure.
go.
That's a great answer.
Probably.
No,
that's a great one. I was going to say,
answer.
I think that's kind of pretty much going out on a high note. At least that was a great experience. Thank you for sharing with us, and that's a pretty good one to I think end off the interview with, at least for now. Unless you got anything else to add, anything last minute pops to mind. That was awesome.
My pleasure, guys. Yeah, I'd love to do this again.
Yeah,
I'd love to get more crazier questions.
We'll definitely do
challenging questions. Seriously, like you're not going to offend me.
We'll definitely do a round two.
Yeah, like one of the things that I've been doing lately, which I think is a great way to live, is that I think everybody should always speak their truth all the time.
Sure.
Yeah.
So if something doesn't seem right to you, or you're not sure if it is or not, I think the best thing to do is to find out or to ask,
Absolutely.
Or to bring it up. And I don't know why I'm getting on a soapbox about this right this
No
second,
problem.
You got a soapbox here, my friend.
Indulge me for just
this is your soapbox, sir.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like I feel like there's not enough assertiveness going around in the world, and it doesn't mean that you have to do it in a way that's negative. All it means is that, here's the thing, I mean, if you're not assertive enough, then you don't find out about the edges of things. And if you don't find out about the edges of things, then you limit your ability to learn.
Exactly, I agree with that.
Yeah, so I'll take the trade of, discomfort and pain and, all the bad stuff associated with talking about something uncomfortable. I'll take that every time.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and it's just more fun to talk about more controversial things. So, yeah, like, don't hesitate to challenge me on stuff. Because also, right, like, I don't know if I'm right about a lot of things.
We'll bring up Hotline Miami too.
Really strong assertions.
Sure.
And part of me hopes that, part of me a lot of times when I'm asserting something, and I think this is just a good way to operate in general about everybody, is you just assert something that you think is true. but it's your job to challenge it if you disagree.
To say, yeah.
But I think if you bring that, this is getting into my own personal
Go for
feelings about this or whatever. But like, I think also if somebody disagrees with you, it's your job to reassess the thing that you asserted, right? And like, see if you think that it's actually still true or not. And that's it's a great thing to listen to people when they tell you things.
Yeah, and that's how we learn and grow. I would say, at least on that note, you know what I mean? Like,
not letting people challenge assumptions.
Softball questions are just like, let's not tread like the kiddie pool water. Let's like tackle some like really like
it's going to deep end stuff. For sure, but like I said, like
next time,
you definitely as always give me some food for thought, and I will certainly come back when we do this again to with more of a knife edge, but in the interest of furthering ourselves, if you will. If that makes any sense as well.
Yeah. So I had a great time, guys. I hope that whatever I said was interesting and useful.
It's always been insightful, Ara. We thank you all the time for joining us, and maybe when we get done, we'll touch base. To set up the next one, but for sure, I'd love to have you on again. I'd love to have it be a regular segment even. That'd be great.
Is it, and before we end, is there anywhere that you want people to find you, or is there anywhere that you are?
Any plugs you want us to?
No, not yet. Whatever we gave out last time, if you feel like putting it out there again, that's fine.
Sure. Yep, we will.
Thanks so much, Ara, for being on. And I'm gonna recuse myself from this conversation at this point. Everybody have a good night.
Well.
All right, thanks again, guys. It was a lot of fun.
Yep. This has been Lost Signals. I've been Scott Thurlow. We've been here with Ara Shirinian. Always awesome. Great guy to talk to, and hopefully we see more of them. And you can catch them on the links we'll put up. And until then, I've been Scott Thurlow, joined by Stephen Amosi's voice. And we will see you next time. Good night.
All right, good night, guys.
Editing and engineering by Christopher Morgan. Music by Stephen Amosi. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.